Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by pain specialist Richmond Stace. So, Richmond, thank you very much for joining. I don't normally give away the time of the year here, but it's a very, very overcast Thursday, November today, and it's hideous outside. So, again, where does the year go? But how's things wherever you are?
Yeah, actually, the weather's been weird. Let's start with the weather. We love that, don't we? It's been very weird. So I'm down just north of Brighton, and we've had gale force winds today. We've had driving rain, but now it's sort of blue sky, and I'll probably nip out for a bit of a run later.
Nice, very good, very good. But yeah, you're right. Shouldn't the weather is slightly boring. But anyway, so Richmond, thank you. I've followed your career with interest, and we met up. We were talking several years ago, and I'm really keen to understand just how you got into this area. You've got a very varied background in terms of how you got into this area. So, starting off with where you're actually from originally. Are you from near Brighton?
Well, I am actually. Originally, I'm from Hastings. We used to affectionately call it the Las Vegas of the South Coast, in the fact that it has no similarity to Las Vegas whatsoever. But yeah, that's where I'm from originally. Although I went to school, well, I did go to school near there, and then senior school I went away to Kent, not that far away, and then eventually found my way up to London. But now I'm back. Now I'm back down in Brighton. So it's sort of been a bit of a circular route. Well, I did come to university here as well. I've been to so many educational establishments, I sort of lose track of where I've been. But yeah, a bit of a circle. But back here, South Coast.
Right. So how dominant is that Battle Hastings is just that's pretty much what I remember from my 3 years of history at school. But like how prominent is that known within Hastings then?
What, Las Vegas?
Well, there's like yeah, all of that stuff. So in terms of like the from a historical perspective, as soon as you get to Hastings, is that pretty much what you hit with in terms of the battle?
Yeah, I mean, the ironic thing about, look, I'm no historian, but the ironic thing about the Battle of Hastings was that it wasn't in Hastings. It was actually in a place called Battle, which probably wasn't called Battle then. And Battle is, well, it's the name of something that happened, but it's a little town, or yeah, I guess it is a town. It's not a village, just outside Hastings, and that's where the Battle of Hastings took place. So just to clear up any confusion about the Battle of Hastings, which happened in 1066. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean that's what it's known for, but that was quite a long time ago.
it was a long time ago. My dad was a history teacher, but that actually I didn't know that fact, although he probably has told me over the years. So no, that's a good way. It's a good way to start. So we started with the weather and some history.
Yeah.
So that's always good. So getting back to what you're doing now, then. So how did you first? What was your motivation to want to get started within that the area that you were in?
Well, I mean, it actually goes back a long way. So I'll give you the short version. So essentially, I started off. I trained as a nurse. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and someone suggested it was called Project 2000 back then, which was a university-based training for nursing, which was sort of a new idea. And I thought, well, that sounds quite interesting. And I went and did that, and it was fascinating. I was at boarding school, and so that's not real life. So I was sort of thrown into this kind of world of healthcare, and it just totally blew me away. Incredible experience. Although I did know that I didn't want to be a nurse, that wasn't going to be a long-term career, but I was making sure that I would finish the training. And I just made it my business to see everything, go everywhere. I worked as a healthcare assistant right the way through to support myself as well. So I was just fully immersed in this thing, and that was just the best training for certainly for what I do now. That experience, but during that we had to do a project, and I remember that project for me, when I eventually came up with the topic, it was, well, pain. Why do people come out of similar operations having these different experiences of pain? And this is back in the early 90s, so the thinking about pain at the moment is still not great, but back then, wow. So even asking that question, people would not just scratch their heads, have no idea. So I started sort of looking into it in a very novice kind of way, but came across some very influential thinking and people, which, and actually for that training, a lot, I think purely because of the types of tutors and educators that I had, right from the word go, it was all about the person. And I remember just some sort of small learnings which have stuck with me, like for instance, learning to shave a man's beard and the importance of that. You think, well, why is that important? Well, because if it's important to the person to have a shave when they're in hospital, you need to be able to do it right because it's important to them. I mean, that's just one example of many, but it's sort of something that stuck with me. And so then kind of coming through the various other trainings that I've done, well, quite a few trainings that I've done, that was always up there as a value, as something that was the utmost importance.
So for that shaving then, so like give me a bit more context about that then. Like what is there a particular, is that something that you engage with? That why that particular example?
And I don't know. I mean, it's partly, I think, due to the particular tutor that made that important as an example of something that, it'd be very easy not to worry too much about that and to do a bad job. He was making sure that we saw the importance of these things for people, because it's empathizing, isn't it, and taking their perspective, stepping into their shoes for a moment to realize what matters to them, and then be able to act on it in the way that we could, as the their nurse or clinician, whatever. So I think that was just an example, really. But we had a number of I had a number of nurse tutors who taught me really important lessons about the person and about working in healthcare. And equally, I came across educators who I learned how not to treat people. So that was interesting as well, and partly how we were treated, or I was treated. I mean, I've never really subscribed to just going along with stuff because that's the way it is. And of course that gets you into trouble. Trouble, is tricky sometimes, when you you question things, and I like to do that. And so it was a bit of a bumpy ride at times, but it never really bothered me too much, fortunately.
So for those things then, so in terms of understanding that person-centered approach, and my girlfriend's doing psychology, so she's always talking about these sort of things to me anyway. But was this all done whilst you were on the job, or were you looking at extracurricular things to help you with that? Because thinking of the other person, that can be used in every context. So was this something you were looking at outside, or was this something that you were naturally just picking up when you were in these areas in work?
Yeah, I guess it just sort of felt right. I must have, when you look back and I must have been exposed to that way of thinking within my own family, and parents caring for grandparents, or all those types of things are subtly influencing you and shaping your world views. And then when it's presented to you as a way of being, as a professional carer, as a professional helper, it just sort of seemed like the right thing to do. Which then as I progressed, and we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about sport rehabilitation, and I did that as a degree. Actually, after the nursing, I did that, and that was a lot more black and white. The biomedical model, and then I did physio, and that was pretty much that as well, largely speaking. And it just never really, I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure about this black and white business.
So what made you want to do the sports rehab then?
So while I was training to be a nurse, I got pretty friendly with my own personal tutor and some of her, some of the other tutors that she was friendly with. And so I'd often have these discussions, and quite early on, we all agreed that this is not a long-term career for me in nursing, but I was going to really do it and get, and train. And so they sort of were saying, well, have you thought about doing physio? And I knew some physio students because we all sort of hung out together socially. And I thought, that's interesting. And I think I might have even contacted a university about switching or whatever, but for whatever reason I didn't. And then can't even remember how I found it, and I just thought, okay, well that's interesting because that's, you know, sport and working in sport. I love, you know, I've always loved sport, and this specialised in working with people in the sports arena, you know, all musculoskeletal. I thought that sounds cool. So I applied for that, and I was a mature student with, you know, with a qualified, you know, I was a qualified nurse, and they were keen on that. They were keen on having a mix of ages and people with different experiences coming on, which, you know, worked pretty well. So yeah, so that sort of came from there, really. But it was in its, you know, the sport rehab world then was in its infancy. There was and the job prospects weren't brilliant. You had to sort of find your way. But that's no bad thing, having to find your way. But then this grandparenting scheme came about. I don't know, have you heard of the grandparent? I don't know if it still exists. But essentially what it meant was you could apply to become registered, a state registered physio, join the, what was it called then? It's HCPC now, isn't it? Whatever it was back then. As a physiotherapist, if you met certain criteria. So essentially you filled in a form saying what your skills and experience and was, and you committed to a certain field. So obviously I wouldn't work in respiratory, although ironically I could do because I was a nurse. But anyway, that's beside this. And yeah, so I got approved. So actually, before I finished my physio degree, I was already registered as a physio. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience, which is all a bit bizarre. But I finished the physio degree as well, just to get the ticket, and that was fine. There were one or two, you know, good lecturers. I met Mick Thacker through that. I mean, that was the biggest blessing. Aside from that, yeah, pretty underwhelming, if I'm truthful. The placements were obviously good. I enjoyed getting out there and doing that.
Yeah, and what were you doing then? So you've done 3 degrees basically. So what was your mindset when you were doing that? Did you enjoy the academic side, or what was the vision at that point?
Well, actually, I've done 4, yeah, you could say I kind of like that. I love learning. Any given time you ask me, I'm always doing something. Usually more than one thing, and usually well beyond my ability to actually do them. So I'm doing something at the moment that I'm not doing, if you see what I mean. I'm on a course that I'm actually doing nothing towards at the moment, and hopefully the people that are involved with that are not listening. I will get around to it. So yeah, no, I love learning. You know, I love that environment. The 4th one, of course, was the Pain Science and Society Masters with Mick at King's College, back in, I think I started that in 2002, 20 years ago. Wow. And that was fun. Yeah, that was amazing. The two key things for me were the nursing training, and that they were the two real transformational experiences. The others obviously had their moments, but they were the two key ones. But I wouldn't do it any other way than all of that. You know, I would not change it. Well, not that I could anyway. That would be ridiculous. But
yeah. So then, in terms of doing that pain thing, then, so was that straight after? For one, how were you surviving during this period? Then, were you working part-time, or what?
Yeah, I mean, one of the blessings of being a qualified nurse was that I could then work right the way through, which I did. Yeah, so you know, I largely supported myself. By the time I was married, when I did the pain masters, so you know, we found a way. But I was still working. Yeah, I've always worked. I've never just been a student. I mean, even when I trained to be a nurse, I used to do 2-3 shifts a week as a nursing auxiliary. It's just never any different, really. It was just, you know, a useful and meaningful way to fill time.
Yeah, no, definitely. So where were you doing these courses then? Where was the sports rehab one?
That was at St Mary's in Twickenham.
Yeah, that was the first one, wasn't it? It's a great spot there. I've been to that campus, and it's yeah, southwest London's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it was good. I mean, now they've got, it's much smarter now than it was back then. But yeah, no, it was that was the first one. And now there's, I don't know how many courses there are. There's Salford, Hull, I think, and
Yeah, we do quite a bit with Basrat guys, and they're such great guys, really forward thinking. Ollie, who's involved, I've done one of these with him. I've recruited, when we had our clinic, we had a couple of sports rehabbers in there. They just, it is a different dynamic to physio, as you were saying. And that, what was your experience then? So when you went to physio, like, what was the dynamic difference in terms of the people that were on the course itself? Like, what was the dynamic between physio and sports rehab?
well, I think again, as I was saying before, the people that come out of those two different degrees are really, offering a whole bunch of different things. And there's a need for all of that. And in the early days, there was real resistance, or appeared to be, and I certainly encountered some resistance from the physio world. Um, and I'm assuming it was because they felt threatened. And ultimately, the people with that training, the sport rehabilitation, sports science, equipped you to work in sport and with teams far in advance of what a physio would come out and have. You spent many hours working on rehabilitation programs, strength and conditioning, fitness programming, health. I mean, certainly in my, I don't know about all physio degrees, I can't account for them, but certainly in the one that I did, well, there was no strength and conditioning, there was no fitness work, anything like that. There were people who had an interest in it, who learned about it, maybe went off and did other courses. I remember some went off and did massage courses, qualified in sports massage. We did all of that within the rehab degree. And the electrotherapy and all of those things. I don't use electrotherapy, by the way, but back then, that was they were all covered. So yeah, in my view, they were there was the two totally different products, but as I said, both absolutely needed. And now what's brilliant is it's really coming together. So I was lecturing up in Nottingham University recently on chronic pain, and actually it was great because it was people choosing to come to that kind of thing. When I've lectured, I give quite a few talks and done quite a few universities and things over the time, and often they have to come. Whereas on this occasion, it's elective, which was like really encouraging because chronic pain is a massive problem, and we need people to understand it and work more effectively. Hugely, there's such a big need there. But it's a mix. It was a mix of rehabbers and physios. So I just think that's a great example because we can all work together. I'm a big fan of collaboration and cooperation. And so that's yeah, a really good example of that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, Nottingham's has got an impressive setup of both of those courses there. And then, so in terms of doing the work with Mick Thacker, then, so how did that pain course come about?
Well, he's been into pain for yonks and is arguably, knows more about pain than most, if not all. Incredible guy, incredible human being, and has been, an enormous influence on me and my work and style. And I'm immensely thankful to him, and that's ongoing. That's ongoing. But I remember that, when I was doing the physio degree, there was a lecture on pain which he was giving. That was the first time that I saw him speak, and this would have been back in, I don't know, we're in the 90s, I suppose. And but I just remember that lecture. In fact, that's probably the only lecture I remember from those years. And I remember the lecture theatre we were in at St Thomas's, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is it. This is it." And I went and grabbed him afterwards and had a chat. And that was the first time I spoke to him, and then very much remained in touch and chatting. And then he set up the Pain Masters. And as soon as that, I was like, I've got to do it. That's what I've got to do. And we had to be interviewed for it, which is good. And I was interviewed by him and someone else who I can't remember, and got a place. And I did it over 2 years, and it was brilliant. And the people in my, in my set. Obviously, I was in, because I did it over 2 years. I was in 2 different sets. It was just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. The learning and the experience and just the whole thing, really.
So what was it in that initial lecture then? That was at St Thomas's Hospital, was it?
Yeah, so I did physio at King's at KCL, but they used to use those lecture theatres.
That's another great spot. Was it the one on the Thames, right overlooking the Thames?
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah, it doesn't get much better than that
Yeah.
location. It's
Yeah.
yeah. So then, in terms of that lecture that you went to, then what was it that particularly really just thought, yeah, this is it, as you said?
It was largely the way he spoke about pain, and although it immediately was obvious that this is far more complex than the biomedical model tells us. Well, not that the biomedical model can actually explain pain, but essentially within that complexity, I could, again, I come back to this person first. That's what I could see. That's what I could really sense from this, the way that we have these systems, and he was kind of describing the different modes that the systems could be in. And actually, I remember. Well, I'm pretty sure. Sorry if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that the diagrams were, some of those replicated in or came from Dave Butler's The Sensitive Nervous System book, and that was coming out around the time, and that was like, wow, that was a great read. And they're good friends and would work together and talk about these things together. And so Mick was talking about those different kind of modes, and I was just like, oh, this is really capturing what we're seeing. And again, when you look back and think about it, that's the key thing, because so often the way things are described to people are based on results of tests, blood tests or x-rays or scans, but none of those things capture an experience. They're totally different. One's subjective, one's objective. And of course, what we need to understand are people's experiences. And the only way we can do that is by listening. But we need to be able to help people understand what they're experiencing, because if you don't, then how on earth can you do anything about it? In fact, it goes the opposite way, I would say, because if you don't understand it, it creates a lot of worry and anxiety and concern. And because we're always looking for an explanation, it'd be very easy to hook onto the wrong thing. And a lot of people end up doing that. Because pain's so poorly understood, they end up hooking onto the wrong ideas, and then find it difficult to get better.
So then, when you're doing that course, then is there a clear pathway of what you can go and do afterwards? You've done all of those courses. Is that, could you see where you were going to head?
Yeah, well, I knew that I wanted to make a difference in the world of chronic pain. Did I know how? Not particularly, I suppose, at the time. Do I know now? Not particularly, I suppose. we just do our best, don't we? There's a range of opportunities and ways that we can take this information and make it very practical to make a difference in people's lives. So that's always been at the essence of it, whether it be working one-to-one or talking to a group of students, or doing a podcast like this, where the hope is that some useful messages come out and people can kind of go, right, okay, well, I can look into that, or maybe think about ways that they can do things, or things that they might go and study, or whatever. So there's I just see there's always an opportunity to keep that kind of. We want things to evolve desperately.
And so, what did you do then once you'd finished that course? What was the next thing you went on to do?
So, well, I was in the NHS for a while, but then because of various funding changes, it became impossible to carry on studying. And I was doing some private practice, so I then worked just in private practice to complete that course, and then I carried on working in private practice in someone else's place.
This as a
Um,
physio then?
yeah,
This is a
yeah,
physio.
yeah. And then eventually just sort of created my own thing. um, and was working, and that it takes time to sort of build it up. And I then was working for a chap who ran. He had an NHS contract, and I went in to help with those patients. So I was sort of doing that, and then building my own thing. And he was cool. He knew about that, and was really supportive and helpful. And of course, because my pain background, I would tend to see the chronic pain patients in that practice as well. And gradually my thing got bigger, and then I kind of moved into that. I can't remember when it was exactly. It's all a bit of a blur now. It seems a long time ago. Um, and yeah, just you meet people and things evolve and emerge. And then I went from working just in Surrey to then working in Chelsea, and then working in High Street, and then both of those I've been going to now for the same places for years.
And so when you're doing that, then it is a big thing going off and doing it on your own. It's like, what was your thought process then? So is it something that you thought that you've got to think of overheads and all of that as well? So what were you thinking from going out from working in another practice to setting your own thing up, and like how much did you think about the business aspect of understanding it?
Very little, very little. I just kept things very, very simple. The number of times people said, "Oh, are you going to get a place like a building?" And no, no, I'm not interested in running a building. Are you going to have staff? No, no, I'm not interested in managing a group of people. I just want to focus on what I'm able to do in the best way, and I could only do that if I'm not doing those other things. Maybe I could be the worst businessman in the world. I don't know. I've never really had a plan. I've never really written. Well, I probably have written a business plan at times. Um, yeah, I've had all sorts of people, friends, family, kind of ask me about it, and I don't know. It's just kind of worked out. Um, which I'm not suggesting people should emulate. Um, But yeah, I was always driven by the fact I knew there was a need, and I knew what I could do, and I knew that it was always going to evolve, and that I would just dedicate myself to that. And everything else has kind of remained peripheral to that purpose, to that drive. And I've been lucky enough to live off that. Um, and the opportunities that have come my way have just been unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I don't mean that in financial business wise. I just mean in terms of the experiences that I've had and the people that I've worked with over the years. When I look back, sometimes I just sort of sit and think about the people I work with. I'm just like, wow. And I don't mean, yes, there have been, and there are, famous people and stuff like that. I don't mean it like that. I just mean, wow, people, and then sharing their experiences, and then we work together. I mean, it's mind-boggling, really. Well, for me, it is anyway.
Yeah, no,
Um,
no, I'm sure. So in terms of that, then, so you're setting up like what was that the kickstart for you to think, no, I want to do this by myself? And then did you know that you were going to have people coming quickly to come and see you, and how were you differentiating yourself around the pain management piece?
yeah, I mean, I've always focused on that, um, and just gone out and met people and chatted about it, and I have. I mean, if you look on my shelf, there's probably old business books and that kind of thing, and I do read those much more entrepreneurial stuff now. If I do read that sort of thing, and to get ideas about how to connect, how to get the right messages across, those kinds of things. So I have done a fair amount of that, I suppose, but it's all work in progress. But yeah, it's always been about working with people that are stuck with chronic pain and helping them get unstuck. I've never subscribed to the idea of you've just got to cope, this is how it is, or manage. I've never believed that, because that doesn't fit with what we see and our human potential. So so it's always been about helping people get better, make better lives. No matter what the start point is, you can always improve something. Okay, well, let's identify what those things are and really work at those. Let's see what else comes of that. So it's always a focus on what you can do rather than what you can't, and then building on it. And actually, I don't know how many years ago, just thinking, well, actually, what I've done here is turn the model on its head. Instead of, this kind of waiting to feel better to start living, how about living to get better? And most people now, I can't remember anyone who's ever kind of resisted that kind of idea, totally agree that's what they want to do. Why wait for this magic moment when some kind of passive treatment's going to miraculously deal with my pain? Then I can start living, then I'm free. No, you create your own freedom in how you understand what's happening and then how you relate to it. That's the key thing.
And how many other people were doing this sort of thing then? So like the other people that were on mixed course, like were people doing something similar to you? Or were you quite unique in the Chelsea clinic or Harley Street clinic?
Yeah, I mean, some of them, I'm trying to think who I know. I mean, some are working in chronic pain in the NHS. Some were just working in private practice. They were just interested. There's a lot. I'm not sure what they're up to now. But look, everyone was making their own way and doing the things that they wanted to do to make a difference. It was an amazing group of people, to dedicate, those years to it. Was, it was hard. It was a hard course. It was very challenging, and rightly so. But then you feel good about the fact that you've done that. So yeah, everyone's off, making their difference somewhere, which is great.
Yeah. And then, so you mentioned some of the opportunities that you've had of how amazing they've been. So is that from in terms of the clients that you're helping, or with your peers that you're working with?
Well, yeah, I mean, a bit of both, really. When you sort of get known for things and you get asked to do stuff, I take it as a real privilege to go. Roger Kerry asked me to go and talk to the Nottingham guys the other week. That's a great opportunity. I love that. I'd love to do more of that, actually. I'm thinking about that. Next week I'm doing my or week after, I do the pain bit for the sports medicine masters at Queen Mary's. I've been doing that for God knows how many years now. And yeah, that's great. It's a great opportunity to talk to, up and coming sports doctors, sports physios, about pain and about persistent pain. And sometimes there's a thought that chronic pain doesn't exist in sport. Oh, it does. Boy, does it. It exists everywhere. It exists everywhere. Yeah, I mean, to say all sorts of people right the way across society. And it's just fascinating to hear about people's lives, and particularly, I mean, I work with quite a few performers in different realms. I'm fascinated by that, particularly musicians, because I love music. I don't play music, but I love music. So hearing about that is great. It's I enjoy that kind of work. And then most recently, I've started doing some humanitarian work, which again is an incredible opportunity, which is going to be ongoing, because it needs to be ongoing, actually. But helping people sort of develop and build their chronic pain service, which is much needed in this part of the world. So going over there and delivering that kind of training, getting to know the people, building those relationships, and then developing that over the coming probably few years.
Yeah, where is that?
So I was in Gaza.
Right. Wow.
And well, the plan is to go back and to build on that. We'll be doing some online stuff. But that was, yeah, they're incredible people. incredible. You know, it's a desperately sad, and it's so, I find it really difficult to find the words to describe. Obviously, when I came back, people wanted to know, and it's really hard to describe. You know, to give justice to what these people are experiencing day to day. But yet, this group that I was working with, the physios, such energy, and you know, they want to learn, they want to do things. I mean, they're very well educated, very well qualified in many cases, but don't have access to the information. There's lots of restrictions. I don't know how much you know about you know how that works over there, but everything's controlled. What goes in, what goes out. They, you know, to leave, they have to have particular passes, and they're very difficult to get hold of. It's a real challenge. Obviously, there's conflict, there's the attacks, and all that sort of stuff going on, and huge amounts of trauma. Yeah, it's so, you know, it's an absolute privilege to go and to try and help. Yeah, as I say, it's ongoing, but amazing experience.
And how did that come about then?
Well, I was approached to see if I knew anyone who'd be interested, and I'm laughing because I may be wrong, but I think, and I'm not going to name the person because you know, some of this stuff is I don't know, perhaps confidential and whatnot, but I think they might have wanted me to do it, but asked me if I knew anyone, and I was available because that's one of the beauties of working for yourself. And so I thought about it for about half a second. I was like, well, I'd love to do that. So I've got this project awareness campaign called Understand Pain, which has been ticking on for quite a few years. And I've run workshops and done various things, and I've been running ultra marathons, and I did 2 years of monthly ultras to raise awareness. And so it's kind of like an ongoing thing. I now do less ultras because it takes too much time, and I'm 49. And although ultras do suit the older body, I was going to say athlete then, I'm sure I'm an athlete, the older body, you know, one a month was getting a little tough. So I do them less often, but essentially I still run. So I've got this thing going on called Understand Pain, and I ran a project that sort of went into lockdown with a company that sponsored some research, which meant that I could, you know, run really intensive programs for people to help them understand their pain, to measure and see what those dynamics were like, and to look at the pain coaching approach, which I've been pioneering now for quite some years. And so so I wanted, you know, for Understand Pain, I wanted projects. And I've always had this thought, it'd be great to go and work somewhere in the world. And I don't know, some people might not like this. It might not be a popular view, but I'll say it anyway, because this is sort of how it seems to have been, that, you know, it's quite hard to get people interest, like the NHS, for example. You know, a coaching approach to pain would be a very simple and easily scalable way of helping many people who are suffering. But it's very hard to get any kind of interest. I mean, why? I don't know. We could speculate. There's probably no point at this stage, but essentially, very hard to get any mileage. You know, approaching organisations that are involved with pain, just nothing much comes back. So when somewhere else in the world comes to you and says, we want you to come and teach us, you're like, that's awesome, because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that is, yeah. I mean, you just said we're not going to ask that question. Is it, how much is pain talked about in within those areas of physio and so? Because it seems such an obvious thing that so many people are in pain. I know you're looking at more the chronic thing, but like, how is that approached currently then in the NHS?
There's a lot of people who work in the NHS really doing their best and doing some great work, for sure. You know, there'll be some fantastic, I mean, I can't name them all, but there will be some fantastic clinicians out there running, you know, individual sessions or programs and things like that. but there's just such a need. I mean, we're talking about so many people suffering, and actually a lot of it will depend on, you know, their entry point into the system when they first report pain, how it's managed, are their expectations met, what are their understanding, what do they do? And obviously that's not the beginning. The beginning was actually way back. You know, this is chronic pain is not, or any kind of pain, even an injury, you can't just pull it out of as a discrete entity. You've got a whole person's whole life going on here. This is one of the big mistakes in thinking, is not to consider that person's whole life, their culture, the society they live in, the world that we live in, and they're all their past experiences. You know, arguably the predominant model of pain is sort of being looked at the moment, probably in fairly small quarters, but nonetheless, it is the predictive model, which talks of the brain, actually body systems, not just the brain, you know, predicting experiences. So what we're experiencing right now is our brain stroke body system's best guess about what's happening, but based on what's happened before. So, you know, the systems that are generating our experience of pain have been evolving since we were in the womb. So not to consider how all of that has happened to get to this point now makes no sense whatsoever. But what healthcare does is it kind of zooms in on something. It might zoom in on I don't know, part of the brain or a particular cell or receptor without thinking, well, why is it that that particular cell or receptor or whatever, why is it doing that? Well, it's doing that because of the situation and the environment within which it's residing. So the more you zoom in, the less you see the bigger picture. And the less you see the bigger picture, the further you come away from the person's narrative and the truth of their life. And therein lies the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and is that something that again, are there other people that are looking into this? I know you're quite unique from my experience and my knowledge of it, but is this something which is being done either a bit more so in this country as well as internationally as well, or are there not many people talking about it like you do?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of people who are well versed and far, you know, I'm a novice in, you know, predictive coding, predictive processing in terms of understanding compared to, you know, someone like Mick, for example, who's, you know, arguably the person who sort of brought pain and predictive coding together with some others. There are people talking about it, and you know, there've been various podcasts I know in the physio world talking about predictive coding, but if I was to have a guess, and this is only a guess, I would say it's a very small number of people that are using it day to day. Now, I'm not saying that this is the be all and the end all. It's, you know, it's a model that's proving to be extremely useful in explaining people's experiences in relation to things like the investigations and the fact that, you know, you might see this, but it doesn't mean that. But there's some fundamental things as well that have nothing to do with the predictive model. So, for example, you know, how often do we hear someone say, "Oh yeah, I've got a bad back, it's my disc." You know, we hear that's fairly common, isn't it? Oh, I've you know, injured a disc, or it's ruptured or herniated, or it's bulging. It's a bulging disc. It's one of those things. That's what's causing my pain. Oh, right, okay. Well, what about if the body tissues themselves had no ability to produce pain? Which they don't, by the way, which you know. Oh, right. Bit of a head scratch there, then, isn't there? So what is producing my pain then? Well, the same systems that are producing this experience you're having right now of hearing my voice and seeing me. Your body systems that are making your best guess about what's happening. Those same body systems that have been evolving since you're in the womb are being shaped by every experience that you've had. Oh, and by the way, all those beliefs you've been picking up along the way, that you're conditioned, so the ways we're all conditioned to think certain things. All that imprinting from, you know, parenting, school, society, all of that. It's all shaping, making us conform, squeezing us through small holes, and all that kind of thing. And you know, traumas with big T's, traumas with little t's, you know, all this stuff is highly relevant because it's purely because of those experiences that you experience your pain as you do right now and respond to it in that particular way. So you can't just pull it out as this dot or moment in time that's irrelevant to everything else.
Yeah, it's quite a deep area, isn't it? Really, it's
Well, yeah. I mean, look, pain is a conscious experience. That what could you compare it to? Love, the exploration of love. You can't see it, but you wouldn't deny it exists. And this thing about pain, isn't it? It's something that's invisible. One of these invisible conditions. So people feel that they have to prove that they're in pain. I mean, imagine that. Imagine that you're suffering and then you have to prove it to people because they don't believe you. So many people have described that very experience. Why on earth would someone not believe? But that's what happens. And they even experience that in healthcare. They go in and see someone, and because there's no investigation that shows pain, well, maybe you need to see a psychologist. Oh, right. You saying I'm making it up then? And all of that still happens. Still happens. But with our knowledge of pain and experiences and how we generate our own experiences, this shouldn't be happening. But it is. So we have to keep working at it. We have to keep updating the way that this is a societal problem. But then if you read something like, I don't know if you've read any of Gabor Mate's work, his newest book, The Myth of Normal, articulates this really well, how, all of these things are embedded within our society. The chronic health, chronic diseases is a massive issue that's emerging from the way that we live, the way that things are being done, the way that things are normalized.
what sort of thing would be an example of that then?
Autoimmune diseases. Why are we seeing so many of these in females? And then thinking, well, what's it like? What's it like in the modern world to be a female? Now, I can't answer that, of course, because I'm not a female. So I'm not going to suggest that I can come up with the answers to that. But I do know about experiences that females have going through. Well, think about the pressure, for example, on females to look a certain way, to be a certain way, to behave a certain way, that's not expected of males necessarily. And we know, for example, that females are treated differently when they are experiencing pain. We'll get different kind of levels of medication to men. How women can be diagnosed with certain things like borderline personality, hysteria, because they will get understandably frustrated, annoyed because they're not being listened to, they're not being heard. And so instead of them being heard, they're then told they're hysterical. It's all well documented. I mean, if you read any of the literature around this, it's all there. We live in a society where all sorts of things are permissive. So if someone's got a job and they're very unhappy in it, and unfortunately they don't have, they have to earn a living, so they have to stay within that. There's a number of things that they could do. There's things that they can control, things they can't control. But it will be totally permissive in most cases for them to drink half a bottle of wine every night. Now, I'm not being judgmental. I'm not blaming at all by saying that. I want to point that out. Because if that person in that situation feels that helps, and that is the opportunity, that is their only choice that's available to them, that's what they'll take. And if I was in their shoes, the same story, I'd be doing exactly the same. So there's no blame attached to it at all. But it's permissive, isn't it? If someone says, "Oh, I've got a really stressful job, have a glass of wine." Yeah. But of course, it doesn't deal with the problem, does it? It doesn't deal with how you're relating to the difficulties or different things perhaps you could do to try and help with that. I mean, that's just one example. I'm aware that it could easily be sort of taken out of context, but But there's a lot of changes that need to happen in the way that we do things in our society. We need more togetherness rather than individualism. We need cooperation, we need collaboration, and particularly over things like, with when it comes to health. And our healthcare could do what it says on the tin: health care. And that always starts with caring for the carers. So there's no point pumping money into the NHS, into new technology and all the rest of it, if you're not looking after the people that look after the people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's a massive area, and yeah, I can certainly see when you sort of break it down and really look at it. And like we were talking about in terms of really trying to understand the person, and that's relevant for in my role when where we sell medical equipment, and you always say you need to understand what are the challenges of the physio, the doctor, whoever you're dealing with. But how well do you think that is taught in from a life perspective, let alone, I mean, a lot of the people, the physios that I've spoken with on here, they do talk about that a lot, which is really good. They're trying to understand what is going through that patient's head or the athlete's head. How do you think that is pretty well done within the medical world? Taught?
Listening to people.
Yeah, listening, and really, because it's easy to say it, and a lot of the time you don't always do it. I know I'm sometimes people are selfish, not in a bad way, but they take it, how does this affect me? What does this have in the impact of me? I do it all the time. And sometimes you think you have to consciously try and take yourself out of that. But what's your view in terms of within this industry of people being more thinking of the other person first?
And that'd be difficult to answer really, because everyone has their own story. I think in our industry, I think everyone enters it thinking that they want to care for others. They want to make a difference. They want to help people. And I think it's unfortunate that most people in healthcare, aside from psychology, don't have mentoring, not officially anyway, unless they seek it themselves. So I've always had, I can't even tell you why I've done this, but always made sure there's people I can go to and talk to. But that's not necessary to be registered. And I think that lacking, and also the lack of encouragement to self-care, means that people get shaped by the system, and the system's heavy. There's great demand. It takes. It's driven by politics, of course. And you only need to talk to GPs, nurses, doctors to realize that. And as I said, until we care more for the carers. I mean, look, the COVID time was classic, wasn't it? Clapping for the NHS workers, once a week. And people meant it. People would come out, and you really thought how lucky you were and how amazing these people were, doing this work. And lots of people did things to try and help with that, sending food parcels in, and I remember that at the time I was living near Kingston, I did one of my ultras. Actually, I did it. We weren't allowed to go very far, so I did it around my block. I did 100k around the block, and raised some money for Kingston Hospital, because they were trying to make a nice sanctuary for their staff. So that was cool. And then what about now? How people feel cared for, as in the NHS workers, how they feel cared for now. Look at the pay rewards and that kind of thing. So it's that grinds people down. And they're dedicated to the patients. They feel that obligation to the patients and really care. But meanwhile, their own needs get pushed to one side. They're working long hours, all the kit. not eating well, not having time to exercise, not having time with their families, all the really important stuff that we need. Look at some of the workers who actually went and stayed in hotels rather than go home for periods of time. I mean, it's amazing dedication, but at what cost to them?
Yeah. And do you think that, again, there's talk about, like, from a psychological perspective of mental, whether you call it illness or what, but there's a lot of people complaining about whether it was being cut off from other people, having to be cut off from their families, as you just mentioned there. That seems to be really prevalent, like even seeing the number of therapists that is out there. Again, my girlfriend's gone through the process recently, and they are recruiting all the time for this. And that sort of fits into the pain thing as well, isn't it? Because it's how do you assess any of this? It's purely subjective from what someone's telling you.
Yeah, it is. It is, and same with depression, anxiety. There's a search, isn't there, for biomarkers and whatnot, but a chemical profile doesn't tell you about someone's lived experience. And you won't be surprised that talking about the whole person, I don't separate mind and body. I think that even the term mental health does a disservice to people's experiences, and we know now very well through lots of studies around interoception and such like that the way that we think, the way we see the world, the way we feel is in large part because of the body, because of our body, the state of our body, the state of our biology. You can't pull these things apart, but yet we do. Oh, this is a mental health issue. Well, you need to go down the road to that other building. Oh, it's a problem with your leg. Okay, well, you can go over there then. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you can understand, why there's a need for specialty, but the problem is the more you zoom in on that specialty, the less you see a person. So it takes that awareness of the clinician, the therapist, the practitioner to keep that wide, to be able to zoom in, but to zoom out, and to see that bigger picture of that person who has a life that is existent now. Purely, I often say this to people. I say, hey, it's taken you your whole life to be sat there feeling the way you are right now. It wasn't just about the thing you did yesterday. But we think that, don't we? It's like some people say, I've had a flare up, for example. Oh, I did this thing yesterday and now I'm in a lot of pain today. It wasn't just about yesterday. It's taken your whole life to experience that. That's the reality.
Yeah.
So we have there's the reality. There is a life out there, and I do exist, and things are happening for sure. But my experience is this. I'm creating my own experiences of that. So there's a reality, and then there's my reality. And to be, we want them to be as close as possible. We want a good grip on what's happening. But if we're getting caught up in all our stories and thoughts and entangled in that, you can drift away from it. And actually, that's often what happens with people who are experiencing chronic pain, is that, the reality is, in many cases, that actually their body is it may not be as fit, they may not be moving so well, but there's a lot of stuff that can be all right. But yeah, it feels like it's not. So their experiences, their reality is this, they're really suffering. The reality is, actually, there's a bunch of things going well for them at the moment. But you may not even see that. If your radar switches because you've not been doing very well, or you feel you're not doing as well as you should, you kind of radar switches and you just look out for a grim world. You look out for a painful world. That's not your fault. You're not doing it consciously, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, we've gone slightly over time here, so I'll ask you one more question, which does relate to that. It's something that you touched on earlier on about reading a lot of self-development and those, which I'm a massive fan of. Sometimes I might read, say, one book a week of self-development, and you can get caught up, and it's great to get different ideas from different areas. But are there any particular books that you've thought that really has helped the way that you deal with either your personal life or in a work perspective that you thought, no, that you've taken something from it that was really helpful? And if so, can you share it?
You saw my bookshelf to my left. We'll be here for another 4 hours.
Right.
I mean, no, there's not. I mean, I can mention a few. There's not any any one. I mean, there are people who have been and continue to be influential, like Thich Nhat Hanh. You know, he's been influential since I was about 18. And someone like Mark Epstein and his writings and work have been influential. Well, I've mentioned Mick. He hasn't written a book, but you know, his writings, if you like, his papers. I'm just glancing over at other. I mean, it really is quite varied. There's a lot of people who, I mean, essentially I just distill. You know, I read stuff, I listen to stuff, talk to a lot of people. Buddhist philosophy is definitely something that informs, because it's very practical. And that's what I love about Mark Epstein, who's an American psychiatrist who practices Zen Buddhism. And he wrote a book, or his most recent book is a series of case studies where he talks about the people and what's going on. And then the second part of each chapter is really, well, how he kind of applies Buddhism to that in its philosophy, but it's in a practical kind of way. So it's full of amazing insights, and he writes beautifully as well. So that's, yeah, they're the ones that sort of spring to mind. But there's plenty of others. People have to sort of find their own way on that.
I've not heard of him. I'll definitely check him out and see what I can find. But I think it's really good to get, sometimes just read something. It's just like, that's so obvious to think of that, and then it's never even crossed my mind. So I always find it interesting to hear that. But yeah, I'll definitely check that out. But Richmond, look, I really appreciate your time on this. This was, I can say that this has got me thinking, I'd say, more than any other one, which is good. It's like, this is really, some of it, again, when you think of it, it actually does seem obvious to think of it, but you don't always consider some of these general questions, which maybe you should do. So I really appreciate your time, and good luck with the humanitarian work. That sounds incredible. And
thank you.
yeah, no, I'll look forward to seeing you. Well, actually, no, thank you for the information on the Battle of Hastings as well. Maybe that's we started off very well there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, brilliant. No, thanks for your time, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Definitely. Cheers. Good to see you.
Thanks, Richmond. Cheers.